General Hospital spoilers for reveal that the wedding of Drew and Willow was never meant to be a celebration of love. It was constructed on a fragile foundation of lies, betrayal, and manipulation that had been carefully masked with flowers, vows, and fabricated happiness. From the moment guests began to gather inside the cathedral, there was an unease that lingered like a storm cloud just beyond the horizon. Carly's clenched fists, Michael's cold distance, Sasha's darting eyes, and Christina's rigid posture were all warning signs that something was irreparably wrong. And when Drew stood before the crowd at the altar, attempting to wear the mask of a man in love, the tension in the room was palpable. The murmurs of the guests hushed into silence when the doors burst open and the impossible became real. Sam, presumed dead, stood alive at the entrance, her mere presence shattering every illusion that had been constructed over the past year. There was no confusion in her eyes, no hesitation in her steps, only purpose as she moved forward, igniting panic in those who had profited from her supposed demise. The air turned electric as guests turned to one another in disbelief, trying to process how the woman who had been mourned could now be walking among them again. But Sam's return was not simply a shocking miracle, it was a reckoning long overdue. Her reappearance at the wedding wasn't a desperate plea or a romantic interruption. It was the calculated act of a woman who had clawed her way back from oblivion to expose the rot that had infected her world. As the ceremony descended into chaos, the full implications of her return became apparent. Drew's carefully curated image began to crack under the weight of the truth that Sam now carried. The man who stood poised to reclaim the Quartermaine name, who positioned himself as the grieving partner and political figurehead, was now publicly outed as a liar and manipulator who had not only betrayed the mother of his child but had orchestrated her disappearance. Sam hadn't just survived, she had remembered everything. Every dose of ketamine, every whispered threat from Sidwell, every moment of isolation and disorientation. She remembered the betrayal not just of Drew but of Willow, who had been complicit in her absence by choosing silence and comfort over loyalty and truth. The media descended upon the event like vultures, capturing every shocked face, every tear, every unraveling lie. Tracy's presence at the wedding became even more significant as her calculated disdain for Drew transformed into active destruction. She withdrew her support publicly, declaring that the Quartermaine legacy had no room for someone who had sunk to such depths. Jason stood silently among the crowd, his expression unreadable as the woman he believed lost forever now stood inches away from him, having endured unspeakable torment because he hadn't found her in time. Cody, who had long been suspicious of Drew's motives, now found his suspicions validated and wasted no time aligning himself with Sam and Jason, seeing in this unraveling a chance to finally end the power Drew held over so many lives. Sasha, holding Daisy tightly, realized in horror that all of her warnings about Drew had been ignored for too long, and now the cost of that ignorance was flooding into the chapel like a tidal wave. Willow, stunned and hollow, tried to make sense of what this meant for her future, but the realization that she had allowed herself to build a life with the man who destroyed someone else's was a weight she could no longer bear. As the chapel emptied in waves of shame and confusion, Sam remained standing at the altar, not as a symbol of tragedy, but as a force of accountability. The town of Port Charles, long known for its secrets and shifting loyalties, had rarely witnessed a reckoning this complete. Sam's return was not the end of a nightmare, it was the beginning of an inquisition. Over the following days, legal teams would swarm, subpoenas would be filed, and medical records would be unearthed. Tracy would move swiftly to strip Drew of his Quartermaine claims, citing fraud and criminal behavior. Jason and Cody would follow leads that traced back to Sidwell's pharmaceutical front, uncovering a conspiracy that implicated not just Drew but a wider network of enablers. Willow would attempt to retreat into isolation, but her silence would no longer shield her from consequences. Carly would lash out at those around her, furious that she had once again invested her loyalty in the wrong man. Michael, struggling to separate his hatred for Nina from his disappointment in Willow, would begin to unravel the custody agreements he once pushed for. Christina, empowered by Sam's survival, would demand the truth from every member of her family, refusing to play the role of passive victim any longer. Sasha, emboldened by the exposure of Drew's lies, would use the chaos to solidify her standing as a protector not just of Daisy, but of the vulnerable truth everyone else tried to bury. The resurrection of Sam wasn't merely about exposing one man's crime, it was about challenging an entire town to look in the mirror and face the lies they had grown comfortable with. The media frenzy wouldn't die down. The photos of Sam walking down the aisle of her ex-fiancé's wedding would be plastered on every screen and headline, and the story of her survival would be parsed, analyzed, and debated endlessly. But Sam wouldn't seek pity or applause. Her mission was justice. Her goal was reclamation. And with every step she took, every lie she tore down, and every alliance she fractured, she reminded Port Charles of what it had lost when it chose to silence her. As Drew sat alone in the ruins of what was supposed to be his triumphant return, stripped of his family name, rejected by the woman he thought he could manipulate, and hunted by the very people he once controlled, he began to understand that he hadn't just lost a wedding. He had lost the war. Sam was no longer the woman who needed protection. She was the fire that would burn the lies down to ash, and from that ash, Port Charles would never be the same again. Drew's relentless pursuit to reclaim custody of Scout and Danny is unraveling into one of the most chaotic and explosive turns Port Charles has witnessed in recent years. What initially seemed like a strategic move veiled in fatherly concern has transformed into a full-blown war of obsession, desperation, and manipulation, an emotional powder keg threatening to detonate with devastating consequences for everyone involved. Drew's sudden shift into aggressive legal action shocked not only Alexis and Sam's family but also the entire community, especially given his recent fall from grace at the Quartermaine mansion and the crumbling of his public image following Sam's return. His timing couldn't be more suspicious, nor his motives more questionable. With his personal life in disarray, his marriage plans obliterated in front of an audience, and his past deceit exposed in the most public manner imaginable, Drew's abrupt campaign to regain control over Scout and Danny reeks of compensation and control rather than love. The legal documents filed were not simply motions, they were weapons, aimed directly at Sam's maternal legacy and the tenuous stability of the children involved. In the eyes of many, Drew is no longer acting as a father but as a man trying to claw back relevance in a world that has begun to reject him. This isn't just about custody, it's about power. It's about a man who has lost everything and now wants to use his children to maintain an illusion of control. Sam, having already endured the trauma of captivity and betrayal, now finds herself in the midst of yet another psychological war, this time involving the very children she fought to return to. The court filings, strategically leaked to the press, suggest that Drew will argue Sam's resurfacing was too convenient, too perfectly timed, and evidence of erratic behavior unfit for custody. The idea that Sam, who clawed her way back from a drug-induced disappearance plotted by Drew himself, could now be painted as unstable is both ironic and deeply cruel. The psychological torment this introduces into Scout and Danny's lives is immeasurable. One parent thought to be dead returns only to be vilified by the other, while their home is suddenly a battleground filled with subpoenas and whispered accusations. Michael's silence on the matter is another indicator of the ripple effect Drew's obsession is causing. Once his ally, Michael now distances himself, unwilling to support a man so publicly exposed for deception. Willow, still reeling from her own destroyed wedding, offers no support either, having come to terms with the extent of Drew's manipulations. Even Tracy, who once advocated for Drew's re-entry into the Quartermaine circle, has gone cold, distancing herself as the storm intensifies. This sudden custody push feels less like parental concern and more like retribution, a need to dominate Sam after failing to silence her permanently. Cody and Jason, meanwhile, are closely monitoring the situation. Cody, who has already taken a hard stance against Drew following Sam's resurrection, sees this legal ambush as further proof of Drew's moral decay. Jason, more reserved but no less concerned, begins consulting with Diane behind the scenes, knowing that if Drew manages to manipulate the court system, the children could be placed in genuine danger. The fear that Drew could exploit his remaining political and financial connections is not unfounded. Whispers around town suggest he's lobbying judges and using media connections to influence public perception. He's attempting to rebrand Sam as emotionally unstable, citing her sudden return. Lack of explanation for her absence, and her erratic behavior during Drew and Willow's wedding collapse as evidence of parental unfitness. But the hypocrisy is glaring. Sam's trauma is a result of Drew's betrayal, and now he's weaponizing that very trauma to take her children away. Portia, having been involved in prior legal proceedings with custody issues, expresses concern over the way this case is unfolding. She confides in Curtis that Drew's recent actions suggest a man spiraling, not healing. Meanwhile, Christina becomes increasingly vocal, defending her sister against this renewed assault. Her own unresolved tension with Drew, especially surrounding his manipulation of Willow and custody of Wiley, resurfaces, fueling her determination to expose his tactics. The Corinthos family, fractured though it may be, begins to rally behind Sam, not just out of familial loyalty, but out of fear that Drew has crossed a line that no one can tolerate. As courtroom hearings loom, Diane prepares for one of the most intense legal battles of her career, knowing that Drew's connections may stack the odds against them unless they are surgically dismantled. She gathers security footage, medical reports, psychological evaluations, and even draws on surveillance archives from the Quartermain estate and the hospital, determined to prove Drew's dangerous instability. Meanwhile, Scout and Danny, caught in the emotional crossfire, begin to exhibit signs of confusion and anxiety. Danny, older and more aware, questions why his father is suddenly trying to pull him from the only home he knows, while Scout retreats into silence, sensing the tension even if she can't yet comprehend its cause. What should have been a period of healing after Sam's miraculous return is now a nightmare relived in slow motion, with Drew cast not as a grieving father, but as an emotional predator. And yet, Drew presses on, even as his former allies abandon him, even as the town begins to murmur that he has finally lost his grip on reality. His obsession blinds him to the harm he's inflicting, not just on Sam, but on his own children. In his mind, regaining custody will restore his legacy, cleanse his image, and give him back the control he once had. But what he doesn't realize is that Port Charles is no longer willing to indulge his delusions. The tide has turned. Jason, Carly, Sasha, Diane, even Brooke Lynn, whose own family was once Drew's shield, now look at him with suspicion, no longer seeing a man wronged, but a man dangerous, determined to win at any cost. As the court date approaches, tensions escalate, with media scrutiny intensifying and advocacy groups beginning to weigh in. The courthouse is surrounded by protesters, some supporting Sam, others demanding Drew be held accountable for his prior crimes. The chaos mirrors the inner turmoil brewing in every person connected to the case. In the end, this battle for custody will not simply determine where Scout and Danny lay their heads at night, it will decide whether justice, truth, and maternal survival can stand against a man willing to burn everything down to feel important again. Drew's downfall may be imminent, but not before he drags the entire town into the abyss he's created. Kelly Monaco's revelations surrounding her anticipated return to General Hospital have ignited a firestorm of speculation, emotional upheaval, and narrative disruption that promises to reshape the very foundation of Port Charles. What once seemed like a distant hope whispered among longtime fans has now transformed into a thunderous wave of expectation, and with it, the emergence of a new layer of control, ambition, and unsettling psychological tension. Sam's comeback is not merely a character revival, it is the ignition of a war for power, justice, and visibility in a world that moved on too quickly after her so-called death. Her absence created a vacuum that allowed others, Drew, Nina, even Willow, to rise in prominence, making choices that impacted not just her children but the moral balance of the entire community. Now, with Kelly Monaco confirming that Sam is preparing to reclaim her space, there is no denying that one of the wildest and most controversial plotlines in years is about to unfold. What's especially jarring is that Sam is not returning to fade into the background or play second fiddle to those who filled the void in her absence. She is returning with purpose, agency, and a relentless demand to correct the injustice of her erasure. Her reappearance at Drew and Willow's wedding was not simply a dramatic twist, it was a declaration of war. It shocked the town to its core, revealing not only that she had survived what many believed to be a fatal plot but also that she had watched, from the shadows, the betrayal of the man she once trusted most. Sam is no longer the same woman who left. Her trauma has forged a new identity, calculated, resilient, and uncompromising. And now, she's demanding recompense not just in emotional terms, but legal, financial, and parental. Her quest for new rights, new authority, and a reassertion of her legacy is making waves in every corridor of the hospital, the courthouse, and the Quartermain estate. One of the most chilling aspects of this return is the aura of unpredictability surrounding Sam's intentions. Her silence, her methodical reemergence, and her pointed demands suggest that she's holding more cards than anyone realizes. This is not a woman simply fighting for her children. It's a woman who has survived annihilation and now wants her piece of the empire she helped build, an empire that others have tried to claim in her absence. The implications are massive. Tracy, who thought she had successfully rewritten the Quartermain narrative to suit Drew's public rehabilitation, now finds herself cornered. Willow, who thought she had escaped her past by marrying into a future, now watches that future shatter before her eyes. Nina, who once wielded influence in secret, is now exposed. Her entanglement with Drew a liability that Sam could weaponize at any moment. The paranoia among the Port Charles elite is growing. And Sam's return is being viewed less as a homecoming and more as a seismic threat. Those who once saw her as a victim now fear her as a disruptor. Her very presence triggers a sense of vulnerability in those who thought the past had been buried. Kelly Monaco's hints that Sam intends to pursue new rights upon her return could refer to anything, from reclaiming joint custody of Scout and Danny to initiating civil litigation for damages. Or even lobbying for a seat on the hospital board where decisions affecting her family are made without her voice. In every realm, domestic, legal, financial, Sam is positioning herself as a force that must be reckoned with, and that sends shockwaves through every alliance in Port Charles. What makes this even more incendiary is the timing. With Drew's reputation crumbling under the weight of his lies and Mina's empire vulnerable due to recent leaks and betrayals, Sam's return could be the final blow that collapses the structure of power these characters have carefully erected. This isn't just emotional drama, it's political warfare. And Sam, once the hunted, is now the hunter. She is watching, calculating, and preparing to take everything back, not by plea or compromise, but by force if necessary. The look in her eyes at the wedding wasn't one of desperation, it was one of resolution. Kelly Monaco's portrayal suggests that Sam has crossed a threshold. And those who wronged her will not be offered forgiveness, only consequences. Every interaction since her return has been layered with coded meaning. Her silence in the press conference chaos. Her refusal to acknowledge Drew's apologies. Her sidelong glances toward Nina and Tracy. All of it is orchestrated. It's not revenge for the sake of vengeance, it's a campaign to expose truth, recalibrate power, and ensure that those who dared to erase her from the narrative now live with the scars of her resurgence. Sam has always been a survivor, but now she's a strategist. And her emotional restraint is only making her opponents more afraid. They don't know what she'll do next. They don't know what evidence she's holding. And that fear is exactly the leverage she's been waiting to use. In the wake of these revelations, alliances are beginning to shift. Carly is reportedly reconsidering her position with Drew, now seeing him as a threat to Sam and the children rather than a victim. Jason is emerging as a silent guardian once more, unwilling to be drawn into public discourse but quietly working behind the scenes to protect Sam and investigate the full extent of Drew's manipulations. Diane has already been spotted reviewing past custody agreements, hospital surveillance logs, and internal communications from Drew's time as acting Quartermain representative, digging for any thread that could support Sam's right to reclaim her children and her place in the Quartermain legacy. The entire city seems to be holding its breath. Because what's happening now isn't just the return of a beloved heroine, it's the eruption of a storm that has been silently brewing for nearly a year. And Kelly Monaco has made it clear that this story is not about reconciliation or redemption, it's about reckoning. Sam's trauma will not be used against her. Her silence will not be misinterpreted as defeat. And her return will not be a footnote. She is the main event. And Port Charles, for all its wealth, history, and influence, is utterly unprepared for the war that is now knocking at its gates. The unfolding saga surrounding Alexis is becoming one of the most psychologically gripping and polarizing developments in Port Charles. As whispers begin to solidify into undeniable action, Alexis is seizing power, and with Sam's imminent return, the legal and emotional custody of Scout and Danny may be entirely redirected. What once seemed like a temporary arrangement is now spiraling into an uncontainable force of transformation. As Alexis begins to reap the benefits of a carefully calculated move into the lives of her grandchildren. With Drew's credibility shredded and Willow's emotional state teetering on collapse, Alexis has stepped into a role that neither the court nor the family anticipated she would fully claim: a matriarch, a protector, and potentially, a weaponized force of maternal retribution. As the storm of betrayal and legal manipulation surrounding Drew and Nina intensifies, Alexis finds herself not only standing in the eye of that storm but quietly constructing a fortress of influence from it. Her ascension is not born out of ambition but necessity. Sam's long absence, and now her volatile return, has created a legal vacuum around the care of Scout and Danny. And in that vacuum, Alexis has established herself as the most emotionally stable and morally justified figure to assume guardianship. But what's emerging now is not a clean-cut arrangement. It is a volatile mix of trauma, guilt, vengeance, and shifting allegiances that has triggered one of the most haunting chapters in the family's history. Sam's return, while initially thought to be a reunion built on reconciliation and healing, has instead become a narrative of fragmentation. Her need to reclaim agency, identity, and family comes head-to-head with Alexis' newfound control. Alexis may have stepped in for the good of the children during a time of chaos, but now that she has built a stable life with them, given them a sense of security, and protected them from the destructive path Drew was carving, she is unwilling to hand that power back, not even to her daughter. What makes this so deeply unsettling is that the line between duty and obsession is beginning to blur. Alexis is not just shielding Scout and Danny from instability. She may be manipulating the entire situation to keep them under her roof permanently. This brewing custody crisis is beginning to unravel the fragile psychological threads that hold each character together. Sam, already emotionally fragmented after being declared dead and forced into silence for nearly a year, is now watching her own mother weaponize stability as a reason to block her from her children. Drew, embattled and humiliated by the exposure of his affair with Nina and his legal fall from grace, now faces the very real possibility of losing access to his daughter altogether. And Willow, previously an advocate for family cohesion, is descending into isolation, watching as every protective layer she believed surrounded her family is stripped away one revelation at a time. Alexis, long underestimated and dismissed as a woman battling her own demons, has now emerged as the most stable adult in the room, and that reality has emboldened her. Whether it's through backroom legal maneuvering, quiet consultations with Diane, or leveraging the emotional trauma Sam suffered while missing, Alexis is orchestrating a new reality where Scout and Danny are raised not by fractured adults but by someone who has weathered the darkest corners of the Corinthos legacy and survived. But survival has come at a cost. The intensity with which Alexis now clings to her role as primary guardian is beginning to resemble a kind of psychological dependency, an obsession born from decades of losing control, of watching those she loved fall victim to betrayal, addiction, or violence. This time, Alexis is in control, and she is no longer willing to give that up. The implications are staggering. The legal framework Alexis is building may be unassailable: court records showing Drew's questionable decisions, Sam's emotional volatility upon her return, and the stable, nurturing environment Alexis now provides. But beneath that legal surface is a far darker undercurrent. The growing realization that Alexis may be manipulating this entire situation to rewrite her legacy as a mother. This is not just about protecting Scout and Danny. This is about Alexis correcting her own past through her grandchildren. And that motivation, so deeply personal and emotionally charged, could lead to devastating consequences. The family is fracturing in real time, and with every day that Sam remains without full custody, the tension between mother and daughter is calcifying into something more dangerous. Not open warfare, but quiet sabotage. Alexis may not say it outright, but every action she takes seems to suggest that she believes she can parent better than Sam ever could. And the children, caught in the middle of this generational conflict, are already exhibiting signs of confusion and anxiety. Danny, increasingly withdrawn, has been overheard asking why his mother isn't allowed to tuck him in at night. Scout, emotionally sensitive, has been seen clinging to Alexis in moments of stress, confused about why her world keeps shifting with no explanation. What makes this situation truly explosive is that it isn't playing out in a courtroom, it's unfolding in the living rooms of Port Charles, in the hallways of the hospital, in the whispered phone calls between attorneys, and in the desperate glances exchanged between fractured family members. And now, as Sam attempts to reassert herself not only as a mother but as a voice within the Quartermain and Corinthos power structures, she's finding herself increasingly boxed out, not just by her enemies, but by her own blood. Alexis, once her greatest champion, is now her most formidable obstacle. The question no one dares to ask aloud is, has Alexis gone too far? Is her control truly in service of the children, or is it a form of penance, a way to erase decades of maternal guilt by recreating herself as the perfect grandmother? If so, how long before that control becomes suffocation? And how far is Sam willing to go to break through it? The return of a mother should have been a moment of joy, of healing, of reunification. Instead, it has become a slow-burning psychological war in which every gesture, every glance, every visit is weighted with suspicion and unresolved trauma. As the days pass and the power struggle intensifies, it becomes clear that this is not just a custody battle. It's a battle for identity, redemption, and generational healing. But with so many scars, so much history, and so much emotional collateral on the line, the cost of this war may be higher than any of them are prepared to pay. Alexis has the children now. But the question that haunts the corridors of Port Charles is, how long until that grip tightens into something no one can break free from?